A consistent theme on this channel is the fact that leftist overlords want us to own nothing and quote, be happy. But that forces us to ask the question, have they already begun that process? Assuming that our enemies will act directly and simply one day announce that nobody is allowed to own anything and you must live in the pod is a very naive perspective. Tyranny seldom is declared. For example, it is unlikely that suddenly, one day, they will make guns illegal and start going door to door. That is something obvious that everyone can recognize and respond to directly. No, what they plan to do and are doing is to chip away at our rights bit by bit until there is essentially nothing left. That way, when they make their control official, it isn't much different and you don't have anything to resist with. The same is true with our other rights. In terms of free speech, we see things such as social media acting as government sock puppets, chipping away at people's ability to be heard through reach and willingness to speak with progressively onerous censorship and fear of being deplatformed or sued for discrimination. We can see this creep into the legal territory with the baker who was sued for not making a cake for a homosexual couple being entrapped intentionally by a similar event where a lawyer intentionally set him up to say no so he could sue again. They hope people will eventually become completely acclimatized to that sort of control on their speech, so when they start codifying it in law, they don't feel like it's a big change. That is the slow creep of bureaucratic tyranny, and the leftist authoritarians have learned from this natural phenomena and use it intentionally. All organizations seek to grow and expand their influence and control. In private business, this is done through free enterprise and offering better products, but in government, this results in more laws, controls, and threats against the population at large. Consider that human nature is fundamentally competitive. Competition is not just part of human nature, but an essential component of human nature, and human nature is immutable. No education system, manner of raising children, societal structure, or other form of manipulation will change the fact that humans will always compete for advantage. If they cannot compete for advantage economically, they will compete politically, and political competition is about controlling force and violence, while economic competition is about providing better goods and services. When asking whether capitalism or socialism is better, you are really asking if productive competition or destructive competition is better. This is part of the reason why governments always seek to take more and more power, because as the government becomes more powerful, the advantages to be gained through government force become larger and easier to achieve than those to be gained through legitimate free enterprise and voluntary exchange. This is called a vicious cycle. Economics and human behavior are full of vicious and virtuous cycles. Controlling what people become acclimatized to is all about controlling the ruts society slides into. It is very hard to leave vicious cycles because it creates the incentive structure that perpetuates itself by minimizing the rewards of being honest and playing by natural laws, and maximizing the rewards of circumventing the system and manipulating government systems while creating punishments for being honest. Bucking the system often turns you into a cautionary tale about why you can't try to do things the right way, and only makes it harder to leave that vicious cycle. This is why these systems often lead to total societal collapse. We can see two examples of this with the French Revolution, where the extreme revolutionary fervor not only was a way to succeed in the post-revolution France, but the only way to make sure your personal enemies don't get you executed. In fact, if you didn't accuse them of being counter-revolutionary first, they might accuse you and get you ended. This followed on the heels of a system that was just as corrupt and favored excessive pandering to the royals and aristocracy at the expense of all else. Extremes follow extremes, and that is why the only thing that the French Revolution accomplished was to exchange an incompetent king for a warmongering emperor. So what does this have to do with the question of property and how they have already made progress towards you owning nothing? First, What is ownership? It isn't simply a bundle of rights associated to a designated piece of land, as the law describes. Ownership is when something is fundamentally yours and cannot be taken from you without voluntary trade, where you can do whatever you want with your land so long as it doesn't infringe on other people's land or hurt other people. Because remember, no right conflicts with another right, so your property rights end where another person's bodily autonomy or property begin. Thus we see, if someone dumps toxic chemicals on their property that seep into someone else's land, they have violated the property rights and right to life of the other person. But in order to understand how they have eroded our rights, we must understand what property rights are not. Fundamentally, if you must pay to keep something, you do not own it. Paying for temporary control or use of something is called rental. So what happens if you stop paying property tax on a piece of land you, quote, own? The state takes it, quote, back. This very clearly shows you do not own that property. In fact, we can see the same thing with your time and labor. If the state has a right to take part of your labor through income tax, then they are saying you don't own your labor, as they must be paid for you using your own labor. To say you are entitled to the fruits of my labor is to say you own my labor. To say you own my labor is to say that I am your slave. The right to use something without paying is fundamental to ownership. If you must pay per use, which is what income tax is, or pay for the time something is held, which is what property tax is, then you don't own either of those things. While complete slavery would be no pay, as the state owns all of your labor, the modern situation indicates that you are at least partially a slave to the government. And if you are in any part a slave, it is fair to say you are a slave. In fact, most of the slaves held today are recognized as such by international groups and aid organizations, are people who have been tricked into traveling to a job, but are charged for that travel and living expenses as much as they are being paid, so they are trapped in a perpetual attempt to pay off loans they didn't even know they were occurring. That is shockingly similar to the student loan situation in America, and the very concept of income tax. Imagine for a minute you got to keep your gross pay. How much better would your standard of living be? How much more would you be able to save and invest, thus growing the economy? How much more quickly would you be able to reach goals like starting a business or buying a homestead? The government doesn't deserve that. They stole that from you. Taxes are straight off the top. They are retained earnings of your life. Without retained earnings, you cannot improve your life or start a business. If a business doesn't have retained earnings, it cannot grow or expand inventory. Keep in mind that there was no property tax or income tax when the United States was founded. The IRS wasn't even founded until 1862, 86 years after the nation was founded. So whenever someone screams, "But my roads!" when you question income tax, remind them that roads pre-existed income tax. Rome, arguably the greatest road builder of all time, did not have an income tax. While roads weren't invented by Rome, there is something easy to point at historically and remind people that roads are over 2,000 years older than the IRS and income tax. We already pay for hospitals and medical services, even if the prices are inflated by government meddling. Other emergency services can be opt-in for fees, like garbage services, or paid for by a sales tax. While I still find sales tax onerous, I can tolerate it, as the state exists to provide a platform exchange free of theft, extortion, with enforceable contracts. Consider this, even God only asked for 10% of your income. When you combine all taxes, fees, licenses, and government-mandated services, most people pay at least half their income to the government. This means the government demands 5 times the percentage of your income than God did. This fits beautifully into the context of the religious nature with which leftists treat government. Leftism and all forms of socialism are literally cults where they have deified what they see as an all-powerful state. They blindly trust that the state is good, despite it being made up of individuals, which they cite as being evil and why the government needs ultimate power. Their logic is circular. They believe people are evil and the government is good, so they need the government to control people and make them good, despite that the government being full of people who they agree are evil and need to be controlled. The power and trust people of all faiths, from Christianity to Hinduism, place in their deities, leftists place in government. They believe it can solve hunger, inequity, racism, war, and anything else as long as they sacrifice enough to it. Unlike modern Christianity, leftists believe in human sacrifice. They believe it is fine if some people are crushed by the system and have their lives destroyed. They believe it is fine we are slaves to the government because we are just enslaved to their God. No matter what happens, leftists believe the government has a plan and our best interests at heart. But that is fundamentally a cultish lie. Government is not God. It is simply thousands of self-interested individuals at the controls of hundreds of organizations with too much power. The incentives to abuse the system are inescapable, and the natural momentum of bureaucracy is to crush the individual. The cults of woke and cult of government are like the cults of Moloch and Baal for modern times, demanding human sacrifice, dehumanizing the individual, doing horrible things to our children, and are fundamentally at war with truth and justice. "You will own nothing and be happy" has become a meme, but we cannot let ourselves become flippant in addressing the truth behind their claim. They laugh at us when we say we will never let it happen because we've already partially let it happen. They've eaten away at the two things you can truly own: your time and your property. They lean on pop culture to keep you distracted and not happy, but confused about what happy even is. Just like they have twisted the definition of ownership, they are twisting the definition of what happy is. But that is a subject for another video. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.